you've said that the ultimate goal is total population control. In a democracy, that is really scary business.
It's actually a totalitarian process that's been used down through history. I mean, that's what totalitarian dictators, states, that's what they want to do. They want to know everything about the population so they can control it. That was the idea behind the Soviet Union, the East German Stasi, that was their idea, and the Gestapo and the SS, and down through history, many others.
In 1997, and you know, the World Bank and IMF annual meetings, every other year they take place in some international location, taking turns with Washington. And so this happened to be in Hong Kong, because my company, Jardine Fleming, headquartered in Hong Kong, of course then was giving a big dinner event for, you know, all these globally assembled bankers and central bankers.
Take a look at this quote. Who said it though? Was it a gold bug, a tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorist? Well, no, it was former Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan in 1966.
My name is Richard Werner. I believe you've read some of my research. Now, I expected him to say, you know, oh, really? Like, what's that? But he said, Richard Werner, credit creation. Yeah, I remember the paper on Japan. I read it twice. And The Economist, and then the actual paper.
Well, first of all, he's wrong in even discussing the issue. I'm sure it was ill-advised.
So then I said, and also remember, he said, as after my name, he said credit creation, magic words. So then I said, oh, well, would you venture to comment on my paper? You know, fair enough, especially since you remembered so extremely well. What does he say? He says, can't remember. Turns around and walks away. Doesn't even say goodbye.
I had worked the Soviet Union problem for almost 30 years, and it was very clear to me that in October of 2001, the NSA and the government, the U.S. government, started adopting the procedures and techniques and processes that the Soviet Union and the Stasi and all of the countries behind the Iron Curtain were using. So we were actually adopting their procedures. It was very clear to me that that was what was going on.
The game theory is pretty simple. If a nation is conducting informational warfare against its own citizens, and citizens of other nations, then other nations must do the same or they will lose the game. People say, hey, TikTok is a Chinese spying app, without considering whether Facebook is an American spying app, which of course it is. Facebook was founded on February 4th, 2004. Have you heard of DARPA's LifeLog project? LifeLog aimed to compile a massive electronic database of every activity and relationship a person engages in. The high-level goal of this data logging was to identify preferences, plans, goals, and other markers of intentionality. Another of DARPA's goals for LifeLog had a predictive function. It sought to find meaningful patterns in the timeline, to infer the user's routines, habits, and relationships with other people, organizations, places, and objects, and to exploit these patterns. The DARPA program was cancelled in late January 2004. Facebook was founded on February 4th, 2004.
And it's not an American problem. This is not about Russian ads. This is a global problem. So we're in a really bad state of affairs right now, in my opinion. It is eroding the core foundations of how people behave by and between each other. And I don't have a good solution. You know, my solution is I just don't use these tools anymore. I haven't for years.
All is fair in war.
You know, imagine like when you take that to the extreme, where, you know, bad actors can now manipulate large swaths of people to do anything you want.
Gaddafi is destroy our country, and now we can test the freedom.
But the way these revolutions began caught the world off guard.
The weapons of the activists of the so-called Arab Spring weren't guns and bombs, but the internet and the mobile phone.
Does China want to dethrone the United States as the global superpower and have the global reserve currency? Well, the first part seems obvious. Of course they want to become number one. However, the second part is perhaps more subtle. Do they really want global reserve currency status? The UK paid off its World War II debt to the US in 2006, so it took them the best part of 60 years to deal with the cost of the war. On the other hand, because they now had global reserve currency status as per the 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement, it only took the US 5 years to significantly inflate away a sizable chunk of the debt burden. Wow, isn't being the global reserve currency cool?
That's what being a boss is. You steer the ship the best way you know. Sometimes it's smooth, sometimes you hit the rocks. In the meantime, you find your pleasures where you can.
The majority of global trade is priced in dollars, and therefore countries that are net exporters receive dollars for their goods. Unless they want to push up the value of their currency by selling US dollars and buying their domestic currency, surplus countries must buy US dollar denominated financial assets. Because it is the global reserve currency, the US must run an open capital account. Many countries do not want foreigners to be able to buy any type of financial asset, particularly domestic property. This is one of the reasons why China would likely refuse to take the reserve currency throne if it were on offer. China is perfectly happy with closed or semi-closed capital markets. Surplus countries have traditionally recycled their exporting revenue into US Treasuries due to their liquidity and perceived risk-free nature. For example, the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia has been characterized by the process of petrodollar recycling, which refers to the following framework. The US buys oil from Saudi Arabia and provides the kingdom with military aid and equipment. The Saudis then plow this petrodollar revenue back into US Treasuries. A win-win. The Saudis receive protection from geopolitical enemies, and the US gets a place to unload large amounts of government debt. In 2014, Jared Bernstein, chief economist of then Vice President Joe Biden, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times titled "Dethrone King Dollar." In it, he makes his stance clear regarding the US dollar's reserve currency status. Given that Bernstein is currently on Biden's Council of Economic Advisors, this seems pretty significant. An establishment economist arguing that the US dollar should cease to be the world reserve currency. With the US set to print trillions to fuel fiscal programs, perhaps the rest of the world will get the memo that the US dollar is no longer king. As interest rates rise, bond prices fall and vice versa. Therefore, the market price of existing bonds falls to offset the more attractive rates of new bond issues. Basically, when interest rates increase, new bonds are issued with a higher rate and provide more income. However, the older bond rates are locked in, and as a result, the only way to increase competitiveness and attract investors is to reduce the bond's price. This means that the original bondholder has an asset that has decreased in price. Longer-term bonds have a greater price sensitivity to interest rate changes, and this is reflected in the interest rate risk. Arthur Hayes did a quick and dirty estimation of the amount of interest rate risk held by foreign holders of US Treasuries, and found that the dollar value of 1 basis point was around $12 billion. This means that an interest rate rise of 100 basis points, i.e. 1%, would mean foreigners have mark-to-market losses of around $1.2 trillion. Those who are long bonds are short interest rates. Large foreign holders of US Treasuries look at the money printing and the associated inflation and run for the exits, as evidenced by the fact that foreigners only bought 8% of the Treasuries issued in 2020, compared with 42% of all Treasuries issued from 2002 to 2019. The Fed stepped in and purchased 55% of all Treasuries issued. This is why the Fed's balance sheet grew 76% in 2020. Let's take a look at the stock market in 2020. Of course, the S&P did very well after the March 2020 crash. Instead of putting their export income into US Treasuries, foreigners put it into US equities instead. In 2020, foreigners bought $2.4 trillion of US equities. Why? Since equities benefit from low interest rates and an expanding Fed balance sheet. The interest rate going up would be bad for both US Treasury and US equity holders. If the Fed announced that it was going to bring forward the date at which it raises rates and or reduce the monthly purchases of bonds, the stock market would crash as foreigners dumped their stocks, and the bear market would likely begin. It is the only realistic option for the Fed to continue printing for the time being, delaying the crash for a little while longer.
So what you're referring to, I think, is we all write down these projections every quarter in the March, June, September, and December FOMC meetings, write down individual projections, and we submit those, we tabulate them and publish them. And most members of the committee did not see raising interest rates until 2024, but that isn't a committee forecast. It isn't something we vote on or act on as a group. It really is just our own assessment.
Is it possible that a scenario of persistent high inflation could be encouraged to bring about a new economic system powered by central bank digital currencies?
In particular, technology now enables the development and issuance of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. A CBDC is a new type of central bank liability issued in digital form. While various structures and technologies might be used, a CBDC could be designed for use by the general public.
Here's how this could play out. Central banks destroy the middle class with unprecedented money printing. They create asset bubbles, and the Cantillon effect means they favor large corporations and those who are already rich at the expense of everyone else. With the middle class destroyed and masses of people unemployed, they offer people UBI in the form of a CBDC. This forces people to accept negative interest rates. The Fed tells the public, spend your CBDC within a certain period of time, or it will disappear. The public thinks, well, it's free money, who cares if it's going to expire? Therefore, the central bankers can force people into spending and stimulate the Ponzi scheme economy. The inflation caused by UBI will further damage the real economy and further decimate the middle class. This will result in more people having to go on UBI, which leads to more economic damage. This vicious cycle continues until as many people as possible are enslaved. The result would be complete control. They can dictate how people spend money. Of course, people can't buy hard assets with their CBDC allowance, so their purchasing power hangs entirely on the will of the central bankers, since they can dictate how the CBDC must be spent and can inflate it away whenever they please.
You know, it's a very, very important part of the job, more important than I had really understood, I think, before I started doing it. And we need to know each other. The heads of the major central banks need to know each other pretty well and meet regularly and talk. And so that's what we do in Basel, Switzerland. 6 times a year we go to Basel, and we have 2.5 days of meetings, and there's no press or anything like that. So that's what we do.